What voices are living rent-free in your head? And by that, I mean, what voices are taking up space, telling you how you should or shouldn't be? How do those voices make you feel? And what would you need to quiet those voices so you could hear your own more clearly? Hi, this is Sara Russell. I'm your microdose host here with your weekly mood boost and tools for transformation. And in today's episode, I'll be giving you some tools for how to quiet your inner critic, at least part one of this, because this is a journey, y'all. I remember the day I realized it was really quiet in my mind. It was the day my pet rat, Sunny Gray, died. Not of natural causes, but because the person I had asked to pet sit Sunny Gray had decided to give Sunny Gray a day outside. He thought Sunny Gray deserved to be out in the sun and the wind and breathing the fresh air. But here's the thing. Pet rats are sensitive little creatures and they're not used to being exposed to the elements. And so Sunny Gray died that day. And I remember being devastated. I loved this little rat. He would come bounding across the floor to share in whatever snacks I was willing to share with him. And I love to bake, and I have to admit, I would bake little rat-sized treats for him, and I would bake human-sized ones for me. So he would have baked goods for him, and I'd have baked goods for me, and they were the right size, and we would share them together. And he would curl up next to my hip and fall asleep when I was writing. So I would be writing to the rhythm of his very soft, sweet breathing. So when he died, I was absolutely grief-stricken. But I remember sitting down on the steps of my back porch and feeling this kind of blankness. I wasn't raging in my mind at the negligence of my friend. Like I said, they were well-intentioned. They thought they were doing something nice. I wasn't going through this looping litany of all of the things I coulda, shoulda, woulda done in order to prevent this. I wasn't going into the past to analyze what happened. I wasn't going into the future to think about how I was going to feel. I was sitting solidly in the present moment, even though the present moment sucked. And I wasn't giving the situation any more energy than it needed. I was giving it just the right amount, nothing extra. I wasn't adding any heaviness onto it. So yes, I was incredibly sad, but I wasn't making it worse with any of the thoughts in my head or any of the stories that I was telling myself. And here's how I got there. I had taken a training with Nancy Chanteau called Quiet Mind that is all about stopping the extra heavy, stressful thoughts in your head. And we know what extra thoughts are because they're any of the thoughts where we're trying to shame and blame ourselves or other people. And the shame and blame sometimes comes from a place of like well-intentioned motivation where we're trying to get ourselves to change in some way, or we want somebody else to change in some way, or we want to keep ourselves or other people safe. But the thing is, these thoughts are pretty useless. And worse than being useless, they actually drain us of the energy and the strength we need in order to make a change, in order to keep ourselves safe, because shame and blame are incredibly draining and depleting. But your brain and body can learn that you don't actually need these thoughts in order to keep yourself safe or motivate yourself to change. We can really recognize that these extra thoughts are vampires sucking you dry of your life force energy. We think they're helping. We think if we shame and blame ourselves or shame and blame somebody else enough that we're going to be able to create a change, but actually we're just draining ourselves of all of the resources we need to make that change. So this practice that I'm going to give you is just the first step of this process. But even if this is the only part you ever do, even if you never move on to the next part that I'll share at a later date at some point, it's going to help you quiet all of the noise upstairs. So the first thing I want you to do is notice that you're having an extra thought. And extra thoughts are those habitual, negative, often looping thoughts that don't come to any kind of satisfying conclusion or resolution. So you're going to notice what they feel like in your body, your particular constellation of sensations. If the thought is based in shame or blame, if there's a lot of dualism in it, it will tend to have a heaviness to it. And that heaviness might manifest in a kind of weight on your chest, like your heart just feels really heavy. There might be a sagging in your shoulders. There might be a sinking in your stomach. Your breath might get really shallow. For me, I get really tight up in my shoulders and tight up in my jaw. My extra heavy thoughts also tend to move very quickly. There's this kind of urgency and immediacy as if I don't figure everything out, if I don't problem solve right now, there's going to be some kind of catastrophe and everything's going to fall apart. So that's how my heavy thoughts, my extra thoughts manifest themselves. Yours might actually go really slow like molasses. It might feel like you get really sluggish or stuck or stagnant or frozen in some way. The point is to pay attention to how those shame and blame-based thoughts that are weighing you down feel in your body. One of the things you can also notice are your emotions. You may experience things like anger or sadness or anxiety or shame. So you can tune into kind of these negative, heavy emotions. And again, as I was talking about in the beginning, I was experiencing grief, but it was a light grief. I was able to grieve from this place where the grief wasn't deepening. It wasn't getting heavier or worse. I was able to grieve from this place where it was cathartic. It was light. I was able to accept the suck of what was, but it wasn't pulling me down. I didn't have any of these like lead weights around my ankles, right? So you want to get specific, you want to get clear, because you want to be really clear on this constellation of sensations so you can recognize it the next time it's coming up, because the more we recognize it, the more we're actually giving ourselves the ability to catch it and interrupt it. One of the other things you can notice is how you talk to yourself. So heavy thoughts, extra thoughts tend to be really dualistic. This was bad. This was wrong. I'm a terrible person. They're a terrible person. It doesn't hold a lot of complexity. Extra thoughts don't hold a lot of complexity. And one of the ways this might manifest, for example, is let's say you miss a couple days of working out and then you're looking in the mirror and you're telling yourself how lazy you are and how out of shape you are. So that's like a really obvious heavy thought, right? But extra thoughts can also be really sneaky. They can come across as harmless even though they're the sirens in your mind leading you to wreck your ship on the rocks of your mind. And what I mean by this is, for example, one of my extra thoughts is, I should pay Michelle. And that seems like a fairly innocuous statement because I do owe Michelle money. I need to pay her rent for the space that I'm renting from her. It is something I should do. But part of my thought process around I should pay Michelle is I get this twisting in my stomach and I get this grumpiness in my body because I have to pay her by check and I hate using checks. Like I only want to use Venmo for everything all the time now because it means I don't have to leave my house and all of my, I don't have to write anything down. My information's all right there. So I'm like, I have to get my checkbook. Usually I don't even super love where my checkbook is located because, it's like in this place that I never go because I never use checks except for this one thing. And then I have to drive across town. And usually I'm pretty cozy here with my pumpkin bread and my mud water. So I have to drive across town. And then as I'm driving across town, I'm grumping to myself, like, why can't she just take Venmo? And like, this is such a waste of my time. So this very innocuous thought of like, I should pay Michelle ends up spiraling down into this heaviness where none of those things that I'm thinking are actually making it easier for me to get the task done. It's not making it happen smoother or faster or easier. All it's doing is actually making everything feel worse. So it's a complete waste of time. It's not helping at all. And part of tracking your thoughts is also tracking how you talk to yourself. So for instance, I speak to myself in the second person. So if I'm talking to myself about having to get this check to Michelle across town, I'm saying, you really need to get your ass out of the house. You should just go grab that checkbook. Why don't you put it in a more convenient location? You. I don't talk about I don't talk about she, they. I don't talk about we, you. And the same thing is true if I'm thinking an extra or heavy negative thought about somebody else. I don't think she's such a jerk. I think you're such a jerk. So I speak to myself in the second person. And the reason why this is important is because what you're doing is you're building awareness, right? So I don't want you telling a bunch of stories about like, oh, I speak to myself in my wounded inner child voice, and that means X, Y, and Z. Or I speak to myself in a super militaristic, dualistic, paternal, like snarky, condescending, shame, blame kind of way. And that means like, we're not actually trying to do any kind of mental analysis around why we talk to ourselves that way. We know like there's internalized oppression, there's cultural pressure. It's the like whatever happened to us as children. It's how we're fighting with our partner right now. There's like a whole bunch of reasons. We don't need to go into all of that right now because that's actually just going to increase the cognitive weight. What we're trying to do is just get into the act of observing ourselves because the act of observing ourselves allows us to take a step back from the situation, watch it, and that watching gives us a little bit of breathing room. And then that breathing room gives us the opportunity for choice. We're no longer just reacting. We're taking a pause so we can respond instead. So this is really about observation. This is really about tracking yourself. This is really about building your wise adult consciousness because once you build that muscle, you actually have more capacity for choice. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to figure out, how do you know you're having an extra thought? What sensations do you feel? What emotions do you experience? How do you talk to yourself? What do you say? How do you say it? Like I said, this act of labeling will give you a little bit of breathing room. It'll take a little bit of the pressure off, which again will create more possibilities for moves. And I want you to catch yourself as often as you can. But with that being said, like the more often you catch yourself, the clearer your mind will be eventually, the quieter your mind will be. But don't add heaviness telling a story about how often you should be having these thoughts, what kind of thoughts you should be having, what kind of ways you should be talking to yourself. So if you forget to catch yourself, if you don't catch yourself as often as you would like, don't add a lot of cognitive processing and storytelling to add more weight back in, because this is all about cultivating more lightness, more ease. And then ideally, once we can catch these thoughts, once we can witness these thoughts, once we can recognize them and identify them, then we'll be able to interrupt them. Now, you can try to do that. You can try to just stop your thought, like, oh, I realize I'm having this thought. Now I'm going to try to stop it. That'll work for some of the low-hanging fruit, right? Like some of the thoughts, they're like a little less oppressive. For the really heavy thoughts, I'm going to need to give you some more tools. I'm not going to do that in this episode. I'll do that in a future episode. So you can try to interrupt your thoughts, but even if you're just noticing you're having them, you're already building a skill. You're already like having an embodied practice around this, and it's absolutely going to help you, like I said, even if you don't do any other parts of this practice. So as in so much of my work, yes, this is about repetition. This is about building some kind of ritual around how you can recognize that your thoughts are actually draining you of your energy and you would rather use your life force for something else. But please, in all of that practicing and all of that skill building, give yourself so much compassion, because if this is a new practice for you, if you're just learning, you are going to make mistakes. There are going to be missteps. You are going to fail some of the time. So in all of this, add a lot of sweetness and forgiveness into the practice. Don't shame yourself for the thoughts you're having, how often you're having them, or how they make you feel. All of these thoughts are heavy enough without you telling yourself some story about how you should or shouldn't be in the world. And don't be surprised if once you start tracking this, you have way more extra thoughts than you realized. Most of us have pretty constant static running in the back of our minds, but it's kind of this like, did I leave the burner on? Kind of like low grade inflammation that's happening. So we don't super notice it until all of a sudden we start paying attention to it. And then it's like, holy crap, I'm thinking a lot of heavy thoughts all the time. I'm thinking a lot of extra thoughts all the time. So just know we're in it together. That's true for most of us. But again, with this practice, you can start lightening that load somewhat. Thanks for listening. Please rate, subscribe, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. And check out trendswithbenefits.com for all of our written work and to sign up for our weekly newsletter. And if you have a relationship question for me, relationship meaning anybody that you're interacting with on this planet, you can send me a voice memo to podcast@mudwtr.com, where you can describe to me what it is you're struggling with, what it is you're curious about, and I would be happy to answer those on this podcast, offer you some support, start building community with each other. Let's be comrades. And as part of that, I get to offer you a discount code special for my listeners, for the macro and microdosed podcast listeners. It's Boost25 for 25% off an order of Mushroom Boost. And y'all, I know you're the true fans because you're here listening. You're probably drinking mud water while you're doing this. So maybe gift it to a friend. Let them join the Mud fam. Let them be a part of this. Hopefully they can get some support, whether that's listening to this podcast, whether that's getting the boost from the mushrooms, whether that's just enjoying something that they like to share with you. Anyways, y'all know I love this stuff. Thank you so much for listening. I am wishing you minds like mountain lakes and thoughts that move like clouds across the water. Take care.